I'm here with Brian and Janice Docherty, the couple who have had their children taken by the state. And the state is the Scottish state, it is the English state, it is the Irish state, because all three states have colluded in order to take their children away. And what is their crime? Well, their crime is the fact that they reported a man who effectively tried to buy their son for abuse. And their reward for taking the correct action with the correct authorities was to have their children removed. Brian and Janice, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for having us.
And I know this is a very difficult thing for you to do, because to talk through what has happened to you means to talk through some very painful memories. But if we don't bring out to the general public what's happened to you, then obviously the public remains unaware of what is really happening in this country in 2016. So in some ways the story is complicated, in some ways it's very simple. What I would like to do in this interview with you is go through, as simply as we can, the main steps of events that took place, so that people watching can understand exactly what took place, but we can cover the ground in a relatively short space of time. Now, we can say to our viewers and listeners that they can hear a great deal of detail in an audio interview that you did recently with David Scott from Northern Exposure. And those 10 episodes are all up on the UK Column website. So we will be encouraging people to get onto that audio. But of course, you're in front of the camera today, so this is a chance for people to see you, and faces count a lot. So thanks very much for coming. So what was the beginning? You were living on in a rented house on an estate in Scotland, and somebody says something to you. What actually took place?
That's right, Brian. A neighbour who we barely met, we had just recently moved to this estate in the northeast of Scotland, invited himself to our garden and offered me £25,000 quotes for access to my disabled then 5-year-old son. I told him to stay away from our children, and he got very agitated. It then progressed from there to me reporting this to my landlord, who is a Viscount, and to reporting it to Police Scotland.
He reported it to Viscount because he had 2 children who were just home for the summer from boarding school. So we were concerned about the safety of his children. And then he said that he was very good friends with this man and warned us not to go to the police.
Right, so this must have been astonishing for somebody just to have the affront to come up and make this sort of statement. So there was no soft talk. There was just more or less a request for access to your son.
It was a very, very surreal situation, because who does that? What normal person does that? Approaches a person they don't know, a father of then 3 children, and offers money in a very, very brash and brazen fashion for access to my son. I was far from amused and told him to stay away from my family in uncertain terms. He then made a series of threats, which I told him to get away from my family. The upshot was that my wife and I decided to move from the estate, but when we discovered the Viscount's children were coming home, we notified him of what had happened.
Right.
He then threatened my wife and I with social services and the police. We duly reported it to the police, and the police took the following incredible actions. They did not investigate this matter, and they reported our children to social services within 10 days of us making a report to Police Scotland. We then questioned social services as to why they were doing this, and they did not give us any clarification. It transpired that Police Scotland had submitted a report which was absolutely ludicrous and falsified, and we then sought legal protection.
Right. And you did have a particular sergeant from Police Scotland who came to talk to you. What did he ask, or what did he state to you?
He stated very little. His main thrust, he was like almost an amateur solicitor for this man, Alan Lowe. He just kept repeating over and over, what can I do to make this
To persuade you.
To persuade you there's nothing here.
Right.
His thing, it was less than 24 hours after my husband had been to police station, and his thing was just to say, there's no problem, how can I persuade you that, there's nothing here.
There's no case here.
Right.
Which is an obvious strange thing to do when there was no investigation. And the man in question did not deny offering me £25,000 for my son, but he gave a Jimmy Savile excuse, which was this was for charity. And there was never anything of charity discussed.
Right. So this request, this offer is made. You do the right thing, so you try and warn the Viscount off because his children could be at risk.
Yes.
The police do get involved, but they don't do any investigation. In fact, they try and warn you off. What can we do to make this matter go away?
Well,
so at that stage, social services were also engaged. And what do they have to say to you?
Social services turned up unannounced, and I contacted the local social work manager, who told me that there had been a report from Police Scotland, and this was all the more incredible in that Police Scotland had not seen our children, and our children had never been seen by social services. 4 very loved, well cared for children. Social services said that there had been a report by Police Scotland which had said they had a number of concerns, that we were obsessed with paedophiles, and that we were isolated. Now, of course, we lived in a country estate 5 miles from Fraserburgh, so it was hardly...
It was we who said to Sergeant Buchan that we were isolated in terms of we were at risk because there'd been events at night, there'd been intimidation.
You'd had men and people around the property, and you'd had damage to the greenhouse, which was dangerous.
Right. Yeah, there were some very threatening events.
There's a number of very sort of harassment and vandalisms against property, which we reported, which went unsupported.
Right.
So it was this kind of increasing campaign which the police were turning a deaf ear to, and our sole concern was the safety of our children. And instead, for reporting this, social services turned their campaign against our family as a result of Police Scotland's report.
Right. Now, what did you decide to do? You felt that it was better to leave and try and get away. Was that what
our first thought was actually just that we'd move as soon actually as Alan Lowe made his offer. We thought we have to move house. He lives right next door. Christian was just a wee baby at the time he was born. So we had the 4 children, and so our first thought had been just start packing up and move house. But at this point, it was a daily event where you were in contact with the manager for social work.
Yeah.
Right.
And we weren't getting
anywhere
at all. We couldn't get to solicitor. Even out with Aberdeenshire, we couldn't get to solicitor.
Right.
And I just said, right, this is increasingly dangerous. We need to get away and take time and try and report this above,
above the level which was at, because the writing was on the wall. It was very clear what was happening. So my wife said we should go and get a week's holiday, go somewhere safe, and report this to a much senior level. Because who do you contact when the police and social services are behaving so corruptly?
Right.
So that's what we did.
Okay. Now, just to give our viewers and listeners a perspective on this, so the first event took place in January 2014. Is that correct?
July.
Or thereabouts, 2014.
The offer by Alan Lowe.
July.
July.
Mistake. July. And then in September, with a variety of things going on, you decide that you need to get away. And that takes you to Ireland at that stage.
I booked a holiday home for a week down in Tipperary, and we left on the 5th of, I think it was Friday the 5th of September.
Right.
And we only planned to be away for a week, and
we're still
in Ireland.
Okay. Right, just take us through the sort of chronology of this now. So you go over to Ireland, and what are you doing there? You're still trying to have discussions with the authorities, or do you withdraw from it?
Yeah,
no, you were still in contact by email.
I was still in contact with, it moved from Sergeant Buchan to an Inspector Cordiner from Peterhead Police Station, and an Inspector Brown was in the background of this as well. Right. Initially, our purpose was to get the children somewhere safe and to put together a series of statements which we could send to the Scottish Government. What actually happened is that Police Scotland's only interest was in discovering our location, and they wanted, it was a constant series of harassment. So effectively, we were told to Interpol.
On the Friday night after we,
on the
exactly
last
a
night
week
of our
after we'd
stay
left,
in Ireland,
at 10 o'clock at night.
the 12th of September at 10 p.m, 2 Garda officers turned up to our holiday home and demanded to see that the children were safe. What transpired was that Police Scotland had sought a report from a health visitor we had never seen before and had never seen our children, to say that our children or my daughter specifically, was in danger.
Although we didn't find this out for many months.
And this was in relation to a relative. This was nothing to do with you. This was an accusation made against a relative who was in fact dead.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, so you could hardly be any great risk.
Right. So the Garda turn up, and what happens then?
They were actually very
They were
pleasant.
very nice.
They did report back that there was no problems. They
seemed rather confused with the whole situation, and we told them actually that this was now very dangerous, because I asked the Garda on what basis did this happen, and he explained that we'd been referred to Interpol.
As a top risk or something? What's high risk?
As a high risk priority. Yeah. So as a result of reporting a paedophile who had not denied offering me £25,000 for my son, Social Services and Aberdeenshire Council, at the very highest level, had reported our family through their social work manager David O'Neill and director Richie Johnson to Police Scotland. And Police Scotland had reported it to Social Services, and together with Social Services, they solicited a report from a health visitor we'd never seen before,
right,
who then reported it to the Scottish Government and to apparently Interpol.
Okay, now I would just state here that one of the themes through the whole of this case is that it's obvious that a very large number of people in the authorities are talking to each other, so the police and social services and the local council. But you've now moved jurisdiction, if you like. We've gone from Scotland across to Ireland. Exactly the same thing still happening around you.
That's right.
With the added connection that now that network is linking back in with the original team in Scotland, Police Scotland.
That's right.
Right. So what happens to the children? The Garda arrive.
They just...
the Garda said the children were fine.
Yeah, they seemed quite happy. Lottie showed them our guinea pigs. We'd taken the guinea pigs on holiday with us. And
we told them...
They realised just a normal family, there's no problems. They didn't have any doubts on that, and they reported back that there were no problems.
We asked for their help, actually, because we realised this was a very dangerous situation. And they said they didn't want to be involved. So we decided to stay in Ireland, because clearly, at that time, we were told it was Interpol. It was actually the National Crime Agency, which we discovered later. But we realised that the corruption has gone from local Police Scotland officers and local senior figures within Aberdeenshire Council to an international policing body normally associated with drug trafficking and organised crime. So we thought the corruption's off the chart, and it's extremely dangerous for our children and ourselves to go back to Scotland. We'll stay in Ireland until we can try and get this sorted out.
Right. I'm going to deliberately use this word, but you felt hunted at that stage.
Well, it was
actually quite terrifying.
It was an extremely unusual situation. I mean, who could envisage this kind of treatment? And this was nothing for what was to come.
Right. Okay, so let's take us through that, what is to come, because you have the incident with the police. You were living there trying to understand what's happening around you.
Yeah.
Where does that lead? Into court?
We sent a dossier of which the judge in court in January later called explosive, of detailed statements of everything which had transpired in the estate of Crimmingate to the British government in November of 2014. This dossier was sent to the Scottish government as a devolved matter, and the Scottish government then incredibly gave this information about a paedophile and corruption within Police Scotland and Aberdeenshire Council. The Scottish Government then delegated that information to the very same
and Aberdeenshire Council.
So those two organisations put together a task force, but not any old task force, an international task force, working with their counterparts in the Garda and in Irish Social Services.
Right, so absolutely no separation of powers, that you quite rightly report criminal activity, wrongdoing, and then one authority says, well, we need to deal with this, we will deal with the police. In fact, the information's fed back into the system and given to the very people who've caused you the problem in the first place. But now we've got the international link and we've got the Irish authorities involved in it. Right, so we just keep moving this one through. So at what point do they try and take your children? Because this is the
The
meat
first
of it.
time was the 28th of January 2015. They just turned up. We had had no correspondence, no
prior
contact from
contact.
anybody. They
We-
turned
So
up.
effectively it quietened down.
Yeah,
Well-
we had been aware of surveillance
But
by people who were clearly following us in our. We didn't know who they were, we didn't know what, but we knew that there were people following us from different, including the north of Ireland as well, which we then later reported. But without, as Janice says, without any prior warning, 2 armed Garda officers, 2 local officers, and 2 social workers turned up,
at about 8 o'clock in the morning on Wednesday, the 28th
Shouting
of
it and-
January, forced their way into the house, which I think is against the Irish Constitution. Forced their way into the house, physically pushed you backwards, and
threatened us with the removal of our children if we didn't cooperate then and there.
but they didn't have a warrant.
And they didn't have a
They
court
hadn't
order.
obtained a warrant
Right.
at that point.
And we were told there'd be an independent assessment of the children, things would be done above board, and instead the 2 social workers went and got a court order against their
Their own investigation actually proved that there was no problem. The children
With
were
the children.
happy and there were no issues. But they told us they were going to keep the children anyway,
Right.
based on the notes from Scotland, which they had promised us.
Okay.
They would not look at. They'd do their own independent
Right, so
assessment.
your children were taken away. That's 4 children. Just for ages, we can't mention names, but just tell us the ages of the children that were taken.
At the time, baby was 7 months.
7 months.
7-month-old
7 or 8.
baby.
Yeah.
Again, it's difficult not to mention the names.
Our
Age,
son was 5. Our disabled son, who's an autistic boy.
his
Our
younger sister was
was
4, and our oldest was 12.
Right.
Carol
So
was
4 children just disappear. You see them go, and that leads to some court hearings.
That's correct.
Just very clipped. What takes place in those hearings?
in those hearings.
The first hearing was the 2nd of February.
Two police officers and 2 social workers. We had
One from each country. So
one social worker and 1 police officer, from each country testified that we were mentally unbalanced,
delusional.
and
was the
we'd
word.
never met these.
So yes, we didn't know these people.
Right,
The
so-
social
so-
worker from Aberdeenshire, we'd never met. The police officer from Aberdeenshire, we'd never met. And the social worker and the police officer from County Mayo, we'd only met when they took our children.
Okay, but the main thrust is that you are delusional.
Yeah.
You've got mental health
Delusional
problems.
because we reported a paedophile.
Delusional for that.
That's the
The
basis
judge-
for our being delusional.
What actually came out in court was the judge reprimanded the lead social worker, a woman called Mary Millie, who had a brand new British registered
Car which she
Vauxhall Astra.
received
She
in the
received
morning.
that morning.
On the morning she turned up to take her
She was
children.
reprimanded by the judge, Mary Devons, for priming medical staff to have us sectioned in
She
corresponding with
actually
Police
admitted-
Scotland.
Admitted she was doing that in court.
In court.
Okay.
We had proof of this and we told our lawyer, and she was questioned in court and she admitted it. And the judge then ordered, because 4 different professionals were saying we were delusional and mentally unstable, the judge ordered a psychiatric assessment, which we had to go out of the Republican jurisdiction. We had to go to the north,
Because we could not get
we
a
couldn't get a
psychiatrist in the
psychiatrist.
Republic at all.
who was
Or we
independent.
could, but not,
You didn't
not,
trust
not
them.
anyone
Yeah.
we trusted.
And the psychiatrist we did get was a very good man and a very fair man, and he said that we had dynamic mental health and very resilient mental health, and gave us a very good report. We presented these reports to the court on 26th of February, and the judge gave us our children back.
No, we had our
we
children
had our children
back.
on the 2nd,
Right.
but our children were returned to us permanently.
Yeah, we were returned to us on a supervision order, and it has to be said, the social workers did not come out to see the children. They weren't interested in the children because they knew they weren't at risk. Knew there was no problem.
There was no...
And actually, the only person they wanted to see was my husband. They wanted my husband to go alone to the social work offices in Castlebar,
Okay.
which
Now,
we decided was unsafe.
right, there's a lot of material here, and because
Yes. we need
of
to-
the interest in these child stealing cases, we could talk a lot of detail about this. I just want to keep you moving through. So presumably, big sigh of relief that you get your children back,
Oh, yes.
but you're still fighting,
Yes.
and now you start to really to really point a finger at the state institutions. So you're doing your own research, you're writing letters, You're putting the pressure on, and you're putting the pressure on Police Scotland.
Yeah, it was. That's right, Brian. In a sense, though, it was more to protect our children and our family, because it was made very clear to us that Police Scotland were not going to stop, and the surveillance did not stop. And actually, the confirmation of surveillance came out in court hearings, and we were made it very clear to us that it was extremely dangerous to return to Scotland. So the agenda for...
Sorry, just push you on that one a little bit. So how did you hear that it was dangerous?
It was confirmed to us by a source that if we were to return to Scotland, I would be, quotes, lucky if I was kicked to death, was the exact words.
Become a bit of a family joke, you know.
So we obviously decided to stay in Ireland and try to get legal protection again. That did not happen. We did a number of freedom of information requests. They did not happen. We complained to a number of bodies. There was cover-up after cover-up after cover-up.
With Phyllis Smart, NHS Grampian said that she wrote the report, which was obviously completely fictitious, because Police Scotland requested her to do so, and therefore she's perfectly entitled to do it. So even though she made it up, even though it was damning and it was used to take our children away from us, apparently because Police Scotland asked her to do so, there's no problem.
Right, now I'm just going to inject in here for people that picked up that you're saying that if you went back to Scotland you could be at risk. Of course, one of the incidents that took place right at the beginning was that somebody interfered with the glass in the greenhouse door, and that glass fell and could have cut your daughter and given her a serious injury. So the people who were operating around you were prepared to conduct criminal damage.
There was two
with the intent to hurt. Yeah,
there were two things in relation to children, and with the greenhouse, the door was rigged, the glass panels on the door were rigged to fall, and it was our son, our autistic son, the one they offered to buy, whom they intended to hurt, because it was his toy car that was placed inside the greenhouse. Right. Our son does not go into enclosed spaces. He's autistic. He can't cope with it. Right. So even though the greenhouse is lit, he couldn't go into it. So his wee sister went in to get it, and the door the 3 glass panes just fell on top of her.
And this is because the clips had been removed in that glass door.
Yeah, they'd taken the runner. They'd taken the rubber out of the top lining, out of the top runner. They'd put stones along the bottom runner. They'd taken the clips off the glass panes so that as soon as somebody pushed the door, the glass would just fall out. Right. It was obviously intended for our son, but it was our daughter.
There were other things happening as well, but that is an example which shows that around you was some very, very dangerous individuals. So this was a very dangerous incident, somebody rigging a greenhouse for the glass to fall, cut an adult, severely injured a child. So these are dangerous people. You are still pressing Police Scotland, you're writing these letters, and you learn that these letters are being circulated. So you're talking to Theresa May at that stage, is that correct? Or writing to the Home Office anyway?
That's right. But clearly it was becoming more and more evident to us there was no support from Scotland. And
quite the contrary.
Quite the opposite, actually.
Serious attack coming from Scotland.
We were put in some very serious danger from the Scottish Government. And so Police Scotland eventually sent me a report which confirmed that on a night in which I'd made my statement to the police, that Alan Lowe and the Viscount were with Sergeant Buchan in Fraserburgh Police Station. I referred this cover-up report, which they confirmed these people were all in the same police station while I was in a different police station making my statement on the very same night. And I made the complaint to PIRC, who is a bit like the IPCC in England, the Police Investigations and Review Commissioner. Of our 12 complaints, 12 very serious complaints, PIRC upheld 11 of them, including a false report to social services, a false report to Interpol, false statements about our children.
And the fact that Sergeant Buchan had altered
key aspects of another
the consent
officer's
report,
report,
which was supposed to have been written by somebody else.
So these were all upheld. Unfortunately, our situation did not become any less dangerous, and we couldn't get legal protection. There was no solicitor in the Republic of Ireland who would take our case to protect us, and none of the bodies which we wrote to would supply freedom of information requests, with the exception of the Scottish Government, who rather revealingly only sent me back all the letters and emails I had sent them, and everything else had been blacked out and censored.
Redacted,
yeah. So, and under these circumstances, it then became, there was a number of things which happened which were very dangerous, and we became aware of further surveillance. So we complained again as more information became available about what was happening from Police Scotland and other bodies.
Right. And when you talk about surveillance, you're talking about people watching you or following you. What was, just little clip, what was actually happening?
Initially, as early as September and October of 2014, there were cars and vans in Ireland following us and watching us and taking photographs of us. And this progressed to housebreakings where documents were stolen, financial information was stolen, our bed was urinated upon, our dogs were beaten.
During the court hearing on the 2nd of February. Somebody broke in and peed on the bed.
Our dogs were tasered and beaten. Computer things were stolen, discs, flash drives, personal information was stolen, passports.
Things like that are
Right,
still
so
happening.
for any ordinary person out there, a burglary is bad enough, somebody coming into your house, but this was a repetition of events, which is a total invasion of your privacy.
That's right, Brian.
It's still happening. It's a regular thing, and it's really...
For the past 22 months, we've been burgled, without exaggeration, over 100 times.
Yeah.
Over 100 times.
Okay.
And it's sickening because there is no peace, and it's a deliberate campaign of, the only way to describe it is it's a campaign of terror to intimidate, harass, destabilise. And frankly, there's a lot of things which happen when these burglaries happen, where in many cases they don't actually take anything of value, or in some cases they don't take anything at all. But there's a lot of things which are moved about to a different part of the house, or removed from the house and then placed back at a later date.
And another thing that they like to take is items which would have our DNA on it. They stole my daughter's hairbrush, they've stolen underwear as a regular, they've stolen towels and nightwear and all manner of things like that.
Okay. Right, so you are challenging the establishment in a big way via letters and communication.
At that time, we didn't, sorry to interrupt you, Brian, but we didn't really see it as challenging the establishment. We saw it as trying to protect our children. At no point did we see this as a fight against any particular group. We saw it was outrageous, we saw it as scandalous, but our prime motivating factor was to protect our children, who were clearly, there were some very unscrupulous and, not to mention, corrupt, criminal and deviant people working in different agencies trying to destroy our family.
Right.
And all we wanted to do was protect our children. Unfortunately, with the exception of PERC in Scotland, none of the complaints bodies would protect us, and no legal no solicitor would take our case.
With freedom of information, a lot of the time they just say, go away, we're not doing it.
We're not taking
right, so when you tried to get documents out of the system, they simply broke their own rules and refused to get them to. Now, one of the things that you have said in the interview with David, which I haven't forgotten, is the fact that when you discover that the police are not to be trusted, who do you go to? This is something for the average person. You run your life knowing that if there's a problem, you can always go to the police. And you discover that the police in Scotland are not to be trusted, and you know that there's collusion, collaboration between Police Scotland and the Garda in Ireland.
Absolutely.
And you know that the Home Office in London is not assisting.
We the only organisation who has been honest with us was Interpol in Lyon in France, and they're the only organisation who complied with a proper freedom of information. And they said, "Dear Mr. Docherty, we've never heard of you before." So contrary to what Police Scotland said, they had actually never heard of us whatsoever.
Right.
But the National Crime Agency, by comparison, has refused, from an assessment to protect us, to freedom of information, to actually register a complaint, never mind investigate a complaint. Right. And the list goes on and on and on.
And this is a top criminal, an organisation which is supposed to be investigating criminal activity and which should have a special remit to investigate trafficking of children or abuse concerning children.
And the National Crime Agency was actually the agency I contacted prior to contacting Police Scotland in the 4th of August 2014. And they directed me to contact Police Scotland, whom I duly did. But it was interesting that latterly the National Crime Agency denied that I'd contacted them and denied that I'd sent them documents, which I have proof of having done by email.
Yeah. Okay, so Right. When is the next time that the police get involved? Is that when they come for the children again?
The situation spiralled out of control, and my wife and I thought that the best thing to do would be to write very clearly to the Justice Secretary, Francis Fitzgerald in Ireland, to the Taoiseach in Ireland, Enda Kenny, and to Nicola Sturgeon in Scotland, and to complain in the strongest terms about the harassment and the surveillance by a special branch in Ireland and by other parties, including the PSNI and Police Scotland. The response to that was 2 days later, on the 15th of December.
What was the 15th you sent these letters?
In the 15th,
by email?
2015.
2015.
Yeah.
On the 16th of December, we went and purchased Christmas presents for the 4 children, and it was a lovely day. 2 days after we complained about this level of intense surveillance, 8 Garda officers, 4 of them armed, heavily armed, 4 of them not armed, but in a supporting capacity, and 5 social workers turned up to our house just after 3 o'clock, and in a most disgusting scene, violently removed all 4 children.
Right.
And a
Now,
very
I know
traumatic
this is terribly hard for you, but for people to understand, just tell us a bit about how it was done. Just describe it.
It was.
Well, we just saw this sort of stream of people coming past the kitchen window. It thumped on the front door. You answered it.
The only way to describe it is a kidnapping, a legalised or not even a legalised.
No, there was no. We've never been given a warrant.
There
We
was,
don't know if there was a warrant for this. We've never.
this was a state
been elected.
orchestrated kidnapping of 4 children
This
for the second time.
So they arrive, including armed officers.
Yeah.
They force their way in. And
Yes.
what do they say to you?
They said that they had a warrant which they never gave us a copy
we've never
of.
seen it. We don't know if it
They
exists.
said that they had the they
right
had
to use force.
right to use force. That if we resisted, they would arrest me for breach of the peace and assault, even though we never tried to. And they said that they would they had the right to remove our children into care.
When
They-
the children,
3 officers.
when the children saw the police streaming past the door, the 3 oldest ones just ran up the stairs. Our baby son was wandering about the living room, and as the police were forcing their way in, I took our wee one up to his brother and sisters upstairs. They were all hiding in the bedroom. The police, one of them grabbed me, pulled my arms behind my back, and one of them did the same to you. You were taken outside by 3 of them, and
A number of these officers didn't know what had happened, and I shudder to think what they'd been told. 2 of them later apologised to my wife and I, but the lead officer was extremely aggressive and had pumped up the officers. And
anyway, they all flooded up the stairs. The police officers, the social workers, they
it was
forced their way into the room where
the
our
children
oldest was like pushing her weight against the door to stop them getting in as our
they just
wee
dragged
brother
them outside like
and
rag
sister.
dolls.
And they carried my oldest was 13 at the time. She was carried outside by a male officer. She was carried down the stairs. She had her arm twisted up her back, and her baby boy had just gone into shock. He wasn't moving, and he was carried outside under a social worker's arm just like that, hanging like he was a doll. He wasn't safely carried or anything. None of them had time to get on even coats. The boys had bare feet. It was winter. There'd been hurricanes. It was freezing.
Right.
They didn't have coats or jumpers because the heating was on. It was warm and a house, and they were just taken outside, carried physically by people.
It's
Difficult without using names, but
my son, who's 5, and my daughter, who was then 4, were shouting for my wife and I as they were being carried like rag dolls. And I was being held down by 3
one of them,
officers.
one of the social workers complained in court on the following Monday that her younger daughter had been kicking her, and she complained about it like her daughter was unreasonable by kicking and trying to to escape.
To get away.
Yeah. And so they just carried them out. Like I say, our oldest daughter was treated like she was a criminal. She had her arm twisted up her back. If they're pretending that they're there for child welfare, this was far from it.
Yeah.
They didn't have coats or shoes or socks, and they were, physically.
Incredibly, in court, one of the social workers actually said that she'd never seen fear like it on these children, and she twisted that to suggest that the
That
children,
they were scared of us. They were scared. perfectly obvious they were scared at this massive intrusion, this crowd of people bursting in and carrying them away.
I think I'm right in saying the children were driven off in separate cars when they were taken away.
There was a fleet of about 8 cars.
There was a fleet of cars. Our oldest was driven with a police escort. There was a police officer in the back next to her. Again, there was no pretense this was child welfare, and it was perfectly obvious this was just.
We were left with a compliment slip. You know, it was in that level of.
From who?
Social
services.
Right. So that had a contact number on it, did it, or something?
For legal aid, I think they left us the phone number for.
They left us for. There was no information about where the children were going. There was nothing. There was a phone number for legal aid left on our kitchen table.
And I think it said like 10 a.m. Like I think it just said a date and a time for us to meet them, like the following day at 10 a.m.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Now, what happens after the children's gone? There are some complicated bits to it. So what I want to do is just stay on the very simple thing. So the children are gone.
Yeah.
And what's the next thing? Is it a court hearing?
There's a court hearing on the 21st of December.
So that's what, 5 days
before, because it was the Thursday that the children were taken, and the Monday that we had the court hearing.
Yeah.
Right. So just in very simple terms, what happens in those court hearings?
In that court hearing, we couldn't get a solicitor for love or money, and we went and were representing ourselves. The rulings of that court hearing did not pertain to the court at all.
First of all, the court hearing started
when the court was closed at 6:30 at night.
So the court closes at 4:30. 2 hours later, our case started. We thought it was going to be postponed.
Against us were people we had made criminal complaints about, including 2 social workers and a Garda sergeant.
Right.
We had made substantiated criminal complaints about, which
it was the same people used from February.
And
is this the same judge or a different judge?
This was a different judge, and this time it was a very different judge. The judge in Castlebar was very fair. And in Letterkenny, the judge did not make the rulings. The person who made the rulings was the solicitor for social services, and the judge repeated the rulings verbatim. And the rulings were, number one, we to undergo...
we weren't. First of all, we weren't allowed to talk about what had happened with anybody.
With anyone. Number two, we to undergo another psychiatric evaluation. A mere 9 months later, having had one which was positive, they wanted us to undergo a second one, but this time
it had to be their choice of psychiatrist. We weren't allowed an independent psychiatrist.
Right.
And the other one was
that we had to remove a YouTube video called Police Scotland Covers Up Paedophilia, because it mentioned the names Mary Malee, the social worker who got a brand new British registered car, and Gordon Jays, the then head of social services, a Scottish man who was head of social services in Ireland at the time.
He's since lost his job.
Right.
They were mentioned in this video, and the chief executive was using his position to remove this video, which mentioned him.
Right. So what is the absolute outcome of the court case? What are you told?
Court case, we were told nothing. There was no evidence used against us. There was not even any allegations made against us. The upshot was that after 4 hours of the most intense kangaroo court, the judge didn't even say our children.
Sorry, just one at a time, just while we're doing this, yeah.
Our children were kept in the care system.
They didn't even really mention the children. They were barely referred to
the children were
in
not
terms
even
of.
referred to.
And any time we tried to say anything about how we'd already gone through this in February and how the notes had, were fabricated, we were told we weren't allowed to discuss it. The judge kept saying, you're not allowed to talk about that. They were allowed to throw things at us, like in terms of, they were allowed to refer to the fact that there were notes from Scotland that they were using.
And the judge...
But we weren't allowed to comment on this at all. We were
very
constantly being gagged.
One-sided
hearing. We were told that
yes.
the judge had actually gagged us and censored us getting access to the notes. Now, when we got a barrister later...
but sorry, just to push that one, so you didn't have representation at all in this?
No.
And we had repeatedly asked for the notes by email so that we knew what we were accused of, what was, what were the allegations against us.
Nothing. But crucially, the judge in Castlebar in February had made it one of her rulings that the notes from Scotland, which were obviously tainted with massive conflict of interest, were not to follow us. And these notes were again being used against us in December in this courtroom. the very next day after that court hearing, after my complaint to the PSNI about surveillance, I received an email from the staff sergeant to the chief constable in the police service of Northern Ireland, a man called George Hamilton. George Hamilton was the deputy to Stephen House, and Stephen House, the chief constable of Police Scotland, was previously the chief constable of Strathclyde Police. So when House was the chief of Strathclyde Police, George Hamilton was his then deputy. These two men had gone on to senior positions in Police Scotland and PSNI. Hamilton instructed his staff sergeant to email me and say, the day after our children were put in care, that the PSNI does not discuss, quotes, intelligence matters in response to my complaint about surveillance. And my question to him was, in what way can our 4 lovely children and our pets be considered a matter for national security or intelligence?
Right, which is a very good question.
And there was no answer.
Right. So, judgment, what is the judgment from the judge and you're let out of that court? What does he actually say to you?
He said that we couldn't discuss it and that we...
It was just the rulings, and then he pretty much disappeared sharpish.
Right, but what was said about the children, that they were to stay in...
He
incredibly didn't even refer to the children.
The children weren't part of the rulings. There was nothing said about them.
Right, so all he said to you was...
Weren't allowed to talk about it, had to attend a psychiatric assessment with their chosen psychiatrist, and I keep forgetting this one, and we had to take down the Police Scotland covers up paedophilia video. That was
okay, right, so I'm just going to keep this thing going on. So did you then get contact with the children at some stage?
The next morning, very early. Now, this court hearing finished 6, 7, 8, 9, 10:30 at night.
Yeah.
We had an hour's drive to get home. Obviously couldn't sleep at all.
We saw the children
the night.
The next day.
And then we had to go and see them, and
that was all 4 of them?
Two of them for an hour, and then the other 2 for the next.
And when we saw our baby, he was covered in a rash.
He had a horrific rash all over his face, hands.
So
I cried. He just sat on my knee. And the 2 social workers, incidentally, one of them's not a social worker, and one of them was struck off from the north of Ireland, and she wasn't registered with the south. So the 2 social workers we had
were
not social workers. No.
Right. Okay. So you have an hour with both of the with all 4 children in two sessions, and then you're pushing on. And what are you trying to do? Get a review of this decision, or how are you trying to deal with this situation?
We're trying to keep our sanity, really, because none of this was legal, none of it made sense, none of it was justifiable.
Well, we've missed out sort of an important point, which is that Police Scotland were due to testify against us on the 21st of December. And
by video link.
By video link, which we were not informed about beforehand. Sure. It could only presumably be criminal charges that they were going to invent against us.
Right.
And we had not been accused. And I don't think you can legally be taken to court without being told that you're going to be accused of something.
Well, not under a proper system, but we live in interesting times. Yeah.
So, but the video link did not work, so that hadn't gone ahead.
And what makes this all the worse is that when Police Scotland were due to testify on that hearing date in December 2015, I had already submitted a second complaint about senior officers this time, because more information had come to light in the interim. So in October 2015, I had submitted a complaint of 17 serious complaints about senior officers. Right. And a matter of months later, a very senior officer, a man called Detective Chief Inspector Malcolm Jones, who was head of sex crimes no less in Aberdeenshire, was due to testify against myself at a closed family court.
Possibly both of us.
Possibly my wife too, at a closed family court hearing in December.
Right. Okay. So was there another court case after this?
In January.
13th of January.
Right, this year.
Yes. This year.
And again, that shouldn't have happened because we put in for an appeal. And legally, you must get an appeal hearing.
Yeah.
And they can't just, ignore it and have another court hearing. But in our case, they ignored the appeal and they did just have another court hearing.
Right.
And there has been...
What happened in that hearing?
Well, that was...
I'm sorry, interrupting. This is in Ireland, still in Ireland.
Yes, in Letterkenny. In
that hearing,
Donegal.
We weren't actually incredibly allowed in the courtroom. In that hearing, just to show you how corrupt it was, when we were being discussed and our children were being discussed, we were not actually allowed to go into the courtroom.
We actually didn't realise at the time it was going ahead without us. We'd only discovered this
And
on the 1st of February when we had an appeal court hearing.
Right.
And actually,
But-
it was at that time when we were not in the courtroom, we were in the foyer of the court, that we supposedly agreed to our children being kept in care and to a second psychiatric assessment. And
Because
For
there's
you.
for us.
For you.
So
yeah.
the key point was that they had no legal justification for holding our children. And in order to do so, they had this charade where we supposedly consented against all common sense because we'd submitted our appeal paperwork on the 31st of December 2015.
Right.
An appeal which was not even allowed to be heard. And here on the 13th of January,
apparently
with
they
special
agreed
branch
to
in
our children
attendance.
remaining in care. The only way they could keep our children was because there was no allegations,
It's
no,
against you, there's no, yeah.
because there was nothing against us. The only way they could keep our children was by our agreeing to it. So they had a court hearing where they pretended we were there, they pretended we agreed to it, and that has been the reason why our children are still in care, because we supposedly, ridiculously, apparently agreed to it when we weren't in the courtroom. They have to give your children back within 8 days if they have no reason for keeping them. It's been over 200 days, and they have no reason for keeping them.
Right. And in 200 days, how often have you seen your children?
We saw them on the 22nd of December. We saw them again at the end of December.
Yeah.
We had to unfortunately cancel the appointment on the 6th of January because we were told that actually, in fact, what they had done was set up a psychiatric assessment. So we were going to attend thinking that we were going to meet our children and there was going to be a psychiatrist there. So we were warned about that and we didn't attend that.
We've seen our children twice.
And then we saw them on the 12th of January. And then for 5 minutes we saw our oldest one and the youngest one a week and a half later. But that's been it in
Right. And
entirety.
how were the children?
Devastating.
Distraught.
Devastating.
Just shattered. And we haven't seen our children in five
We are told that they're asking for us.
months.
They tell us that they ask for us, but we're not allowed to see them.
They tell
They
us
told us we would be allowed to have phone contact with them, and then they said, no, you can't.
They tell us that children have been crying to see us, and they won't let us see them. They tell us that our children desperately want to see us.
And we desperately want to see them. But despite the fact that we want to see our children and our children want to see us, they won't
And
let us.
the
they
lead
won't
social
let us.
worker, who's a guardian at Lytton called Patricia Maloney, actually put on email that our children, by their relationships and by their example, were a credit to us both. And yet they still will not let us even see our children, never mind return our children to us.
Right. And was it the baby, when you saw the baby, had marks on his eye?
That's correct, yeah.
The second time, the first time he had the rash. The second time he had a huge bump on his forehead.
Massive
And
bump.
we were told he'd fallen on a toy tractor.
We were told he had a
And then
hearing
the third,
problem.
the third.
How old, just remind me, how old?
Well,
He
he
was
turned
dead about 19 months then.
19 months, right. So,
And then the third time we saw him, he had a black eye and finger marks, and apparently
3
he
finger
fell on a
marks.
toy tractor. So
right.
He had a black eye, a very clear black
Right.
eye. And because this was not even the first injury, it was a very clear black eye. I took out my phone and I took a picture of this for evidence. And because I did that, the social worker
Immediately.
went and got a social work manager, stopped us from seeing our children, and
Told
then told
us
us that
that was
we
it,
could
we
no
weren't allowed
longer
to see
see
them
our
again.
children, and went to court to get the judge to rule us from not seeing our children.
which we are informed, because we didn't turn up for that hearing because we were held up the day before it. So we were informed that, or 2 days before it, we were informed that the judge did postpone ruling. As far as we're aware, he has never ruled on it, but that does not mean that they have allowed us.
So for
Okay.
reporting a paedophile, we were attacked by police and social services. And for taking a photo of my baby son's black eye, we haven't seen our children for 5 months.
Right. Just summarise. Just give a very short summary of the authorities that you've tried to engage with to sort this out. Who have you spoken to?
Everyone.
Right, on you go. This is a long list, probably.
In no particular order.
Well, order doesn't matter. Just to give us a feeling for when people are thinking, well, this just can't be possible because the local authority would have done something, or social services would have done something, or the police.
In Scotland, the Scottish Government repeatedly, in the last 22 months, They've never once tried to intervene, to respond, or to support us, and in fact have put us in very serious danger twice. Police Scotland have issued 2 cover-up reports and have failed to disclose freedom of information. Aberdeenshire Council, Perth and Kinross Council, the Children's Commissioner failed to respond to our daughter's letter about corruption within social services.
Grampian NHS,
Grampian
in relation to
NHS,
Phyllis Smart's report.
who admitted that Phyllis Smart, the health visitor, wrote a damning report against me, slandering me in a libelous report. But that was fine, according to Grampian NHS, because she did it at the behest of Police Scotland, so that seemed to make it okay. In Ireland, social services, directors of social services, politicians in the Irish government, politicians in the Scottish government, the Garda ombudsman, who threatened to arrest me and have me arrested for complaining about senior officers. The Medical Council, because no less than 1 psychiatrist and 3 doctors tried to have a section.
And a mental health nurse.
And a mental health nurse. The
It's
Justice
the nursing
Department,
board, therefore.
the Crown Office failed to report despite overwhelming evidence. The Crown Office, which is a disgrace in Scotland, will not investigate. Interpol, the National Crime Agency, the British government, the British ambassador, Her Majesty's ambassador in Dublin, the Police Service of Northern Ireland, the Justice Secretary in Northern Ireland, the Justice Secretary in Scotland. The list just goes on and on.
Right.
There is the only agency that I've not contacted about this. I was going to say the United Nations, but they have been contacted. Is now to the European Court, where we've been filling in a very lengthy application.
Okay. So you sit in now. Your children are taken away. Do you know where those children are at the moment?
No.
So you don't know who they're with. You don't know how they're being cared for.
All we know is that powerful paedophiles have repeatedly wanted access to our children, and that 2 states, the Scottish state and the Irish state, and the machinery of those states have acted on behalf of powerful paedophiles.
Right. Janice, Brian, thank you very much for joining me. The story and what you've been through is incredible, and I'm almost lost for words, because I think I've heard quite a few stories about people having their children taken, but it's the scale of the operation against you. Thank you for having the courage to speak out.